In the past, I made a lot of comparisons of Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors, particularly in my video on clones and Fire Emblem Warriors. However, my experience with Hyrule Warriors was limited to watching gameplay of it and reading about it on the wiki. I didn't put any time into the game myself. Now that I spent more time with the game, I thought it'd be proper to compare the games head-to-head for all their strengths and shortcomings. I figured a good way to do this would be going through a list of categories and seeing how the games differ in each. After examining each, I'll mention which game I think comes out on top for that category and why. Let's get started. The first category I'd like to touch on is the amount of content in each game. There are nearly 1,000 missions in Adventure Mode. These aren't without their eerily similar scenarios, and there's no pretending that the game doesn't get repetitive here. However, there's no denying that it'll keep you busy. There are also 5 weapons to unlock for each character, in addition to several heart pieces and heart containers to increase that character's maximum health. Map exploration is more tedious than anything, but it tries to make things interesting. Unfortunately, it ends up just limiting the order in which you can tackle missions. Fire Emblem Warriors doesn't have the same amount of content as Hyrule Warriors, but it still has hundreds of hours worth of gameplay. There are probably only a few hundred missions in Fire Emblem Warriors. There's no puzzles on the map like there are in Hyrule Warriors either, which could definitely be seen as a plus for some. Each character only has one unique weapon, but they can all be brought to endgame potential. This means that there are less things to hunt for in Fire Emblem Warriors. However, you could also look at it as there being less hoops to jump through to make a character viable. In terms of sheer hours to sink, Hyrule Warriors really blows Fire Emblem Warriors out of the water. If you just want a game to keep you busy for hundreds and hundreds of hours, Hyrule Warriors will make your dollar go further. To me personally, it feels a little tedious sometimes to try to collect all the weapons and heart containers. However, looking at just the sheer magnitude of content, Hyrule Warriors clearly just has more to do. Next, let's take a look at how each game performs on the Switch. Hyrule Warriors has excellent performance. The performance dips a little bit in 2-player, with frame rate dropping to an average closer to 30. The game also doesn't generate as many enemies in 2-player because it has to render them on 2 different cameras at once. This doesn't affect the playability of the game, however. In 1-player, it targets 60 frames per second at 1080p if docked, and 30 frames per second at 720p if not docked, I think. Fire Emblem Warriors has decent performance, assuming you're playing alone. 1-player is much the same as Hyrule Warriors, but in 2-player, the game really has a hard time generating enough enemies to get that S rank on History Mode missions. This is docked. I wouldn't even try on handheld. It's worth noting that Hyrule Warriors had the benefit of being initially released as a Wii U title, so maybe it was easier to optimize for the Switch. It also came out later than Fire Emblem Warriors by about 8 months. It is worth noting, however, that Fire Emblem Warriors also has options to run in Performance Mode, where the resolution drops down to increase the frame rate. It does this automatically in handheld gameplay to preserve battery life on Switch, but it's nice to have the option in docked mode. A game should not have 2-player mode be unviable. There's scarcely an argument to be made here for Fire Emblem Warriors having better performance than its rival. There's no good transition into this, so let's talk about movesets! In my video on Fire Emblem Warriors clones, I mentioned how Hyrule Warriors has twice as many unique movesets despite having fewer characters. After playing the game myself, I realized that Hyrule Warriors has lots of variety, but also lots of trash. Hyrule Warriors has over 40 movesets for 29 characters, but many of them just kinda suck. There are like a maximum of 10 that I actively like. Hylian Sword Link, Rapier, Dominion Rod, Zelda, Sheik, Trident, Dual Swords Ganondorf, Crossbows Linkle, Young Link, and Twilight Midna. The rest are just varying levels of tolerable or downright annoying. Sometimes I skip missions entirely to avoid using a particular character. I would like to re-emphasize, the game requires you to use certain characters in certain missions to get you to branch out, and I skip these missions instead. Some of the characters are so frustrating to play as compared to others, I will stop playing when the game tries to corner me into playing a mission as Wizrow or Agatha. On the flip side, Fire Emblem Warriors has lots of clones, but not a lot of trash. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are only 19 unique movesets for 32 characters, and I ragged on and on about this in my previous video. But many say that the worst moveset is Corrin, and I don't think they're that bad, and I think a lot of people tend to agree that the lowest character on a tier list is like B tier. Every character has at least one go-to combo or technique that feels reliable, which is a lot more than can be said about Hyrule Warriors. If you watched my previous video, you know how strongly I felt about clones. Playing Hyrule Warriors has completely changed my stance on them. I'm glad more characters can be represented, even if they play fundamentally the same as other characters, as long as they don't suck to play as. I can't believe I'm saying this after my video on clones, but Fire Emblem Warriors wins this one out hard. It's quality over quantity here. Also, I think we should all be okay doing research and changing our opinions when we're better informed. I grew as a person today. Let's change gears a little bit and talk about story mode. In Hyrule Warriors, the cutscenes are actually good, and while there's nothing mind-blowing here, it's actually fairly interesting. It keeps going, and the Wind Waker story feels very tacked on, but there's a continuous timeline here that you get to play from multiple perspectives. The between mission scenes are also pretty cute. It's like a solid 7 out of 10, nothing crazy innovative or interesting, but they definitely made an effort. Fire Emblem Warriors is just lazy. You just rehash plots from Awakening and Face, and then Marth shows up. Then somebody gets Fire Emblemed, and you have to kill a dragon in the end. Then everyone goes their separate ways. It really feels like this could have been written by a 10-year-old playing with their Fire Emblem amiibo. I don't think it's really controversial to say that Hyrule Warriors wins this one easily. Fire Emblem Warriors really phoned it in, and there was clearly some thought and effort put in for Hyrule Warriors. This next category is kind of broad and a little bit weird to kind of group things together in, but it makes sense overall, I think. And that is the franchise spin. One of the biggest features in any Zelda game prior to Breath of the Wild is items, but in Hyrule Warriors, these kind of stink. They honestly just get in the way and are a pain to switch between because of the controls, and they're clunky to use. They could have been better if they actually had significant effects on enemies besides the boomerang stunning weak enemies around you. For example, the hammer should do a lot of damage or break guards or something. The bow and arrow should offer an over-the-shoulder look and let you rapid fire or something, I don't know. These kinds of things would have made them usable, but as it were, they just feel like a pain-in-the-butt necessity to use against the bosses for the weak point smash. The other main franchise spin wasn't added until Hyrule Warriors Legends, and that is My Fairy. It feels really tacked on and extremely grindy, even for a Warriors game. It's not even very much reminiscent of any Zelda gameplay, but there's clearly no Fire Emblem Warriors equivalent. The way abilities are unlocked feels very convoluted, and I think most players don't even bother with it from what I've read, but I could be totally wrong. Also, side note, these abilities that you get from My Fairy add extra things to your scrollable items menu, so if you pick a fairy with 4 abilities, which is the maximum number they can have, it's even more of a pain to scroll through your items. Fire Emblem Warriors actually puts a lot more franchise spin on the standard Warriors formula in my opinion. One of the biggest spins that they put in Fire Emblem Warriors from the Fire Emblem franchise was the weapon triangle. This basically replaces the elemental advantages from Hyrule Warriors save the damage boost, which can be added with the weapon breaker abilities on weapons. The difference is it's much better telegraphed which weapons have which advantages and weaknesses, as opposed to just having to look it up online or experiment to figure it out. Swords beat axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords. This can be reversed with a weapon ability, but for the most part it's that simple. It makes it easy to know which units you can easily go against and which you can't. Sure, there are a lot of sword wielders in the game, but it's not like there are no good options for lances and axes. Another franchise spin put in Fire Emblem Warriors comes from Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Fates, and that is pair up. Characters can pair up to basically occupy the same space and get a stat boost, which is admittedly insignificant outside of early game, but it gives you the option for very powerful dual specials, blocks, and to have a partner character cut in with an attack that gives you more options for the triangle advantage. Also, you can pair up infantry units with mounted or flying units to ferry them around the map faster while still having the advantages of the infantry character where you need them. The support system from Fire Emblem is also present in Fire Emblem Warriors. This is mainly used for collecting rare materials, but other than that, it's almost purely cosmetic. It is fun to watch characters from different games interact. Also, characters sometimes have special interactions mid-battle that change based on their support levels. It adds a nice bit of Fire Emblem flair. Skills from the mainline games also make an appearance. This is something I consider a huge leg up over Hyrule Warriors. Having both weapon abilities and skills to do a character build makes it feel like there are so many more options in Fire Emblem Warriors. There are a lot of abilities that mirror fairly well with what they do in the mainline games, and they let you make some remarkably mighty characters. It feels good to have that extra layer of customization to see how much you can break the game. You can command units from the pause menu like a normal Fire Emblem game. This was so useful that they put it in Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition on the Nintendo Switch. Fire Emblem Warriors is also nearly fully voiced. The voiceovers in the game really help reduce the amount of reading required to not fail a mission. You know when your base is under attack or when an allied commander is in danger without having to read yet another message that will only pop up for a few seconds. Forget about the quality of the voice acting, the presence at all is so appreciated coming from the grunts and shrieks of the Zelda universe. It should come as no surprise that I think Fire Emblem Warriors really wins the franchise spin category. I mean, do I need to further explain? All the Fire Emblem spins enhance Fire Emblem Warriors, while the Zelda spins mainly detract from the experience in Hyrule Warriors. This may seem like a weird choice of category, but let's talk about the map. This seems like something that should be a non-issue, but going from Fire Emblem Warriors to Hyrule Warriors made for a really jarring transition when reading the map. First of all, if you've got two characters in Hyrule Warriors, one of them will be represented by a blue arrow. Blue is also the color of any keep you control, and your major units, and your minor units. It really blends in without pausing to scrutinize the map. Additionally, the only thing that marks anything is either a green circle pulsing out from a point or a white circle pulsing out from a point, but there are a lot of these things. On many missions, you have to pause the game and open the battle log to see what it was saying and where that was happening. It's chaotic as heck and honestly grinds the fun to a halt when you have to constantly pause and check the details of the map. In Fire Emblem Warriors, on the other hand, there aren't just regular arrows on the map, but rather character sprites you can see for the controllable characters. Every time a side mission is brought up, the game pauses by default and highlights relevant items on the map. Side missions show up by the map as well in case you're wondering what the highlighted characters are doing. These small changes really increase the quality of life over Hyrule Warriors. There's so much less pausing for clarity, and it keeps you in the power fantasy illusion that so many people come to Warriors games for in the first place. The additional clarity in Fire Emblem Warriors improves the quality of life to an astounding degree. Whenever I pause to check an objective or battle log message in Hyrule Warriors, I'm thinking about how I almost never had to do it for Fire Emblem Warriors. Back to perhaps more generic topics, let's talk about the soundtrack in each game. Hyrule Warriors has some great tunes. Some. My favorites are Linkle's theme, Skyloft, Hyrule Field Twilight Princess, the main theme, and some of the 8-bit remixes, but that's it. There are so many great songs to pull from the franchise. Gerudo Valley, Lost Woods from A Link to the Past, Dark World, Temple of Time, Outside Island. The list goes on, but it's really a mystery why they didn't use more iconic music from the franchise. The tunes that I don't recognize really don't leave much of an impression on me. One of them is just Mars Bringer of War, over and over and over. I think almost all the music in Fire Emblem Warriors is taken from Shadow Dragon, Awakening, and Fates, and it feels like there are almost no misses. Also, they went to the trouble of imitating the calm roar mixes from Awakening on. When you pause the game, the metal-sounding instruments take a backseat to a lovely wind symphony, just like in the games when you're looking at the map instead of a battle. This is the kind of soundtrack that I'll listen to outside of the game. Taste is subjective, but I think that the music in Fire Emblem Warriors is just, on average, a lot more interesting and more hyped than the music in Hyrule Warriors. It's hard to really quantify how much better the music is, so check out a few samples from each. Tallying up the points from each category, it looks like Hyrule Warriors loses by a single point against Fire Emblem Warriors 3-4. However, I know not all these were equal weight. For example, I think the franchise spin was so much better executed with Fire Emblem, and that the quality of life is hard not to have once you've had it. Of course, this is just my opinion, and you may feel differently about these categories than I do. My takeaway is this. I probably should have done my research before comparing the two games in my previous videos. I think many people who really have spent time with both, and believe me, at this point I have, will testify that despite all of the clones and shortcomings of Fire Emblem Warriors in the scope of a Fire Emblem game, it is very likely better than Hyrule Warriors as a Warriors game.